Hi, we're here with Dean Sharesky today, Community Manager of the Canadian Discovery Educators Network and lecturer at the University of Regina. Dean teaches pre-service teachers, and I've been following a lot of what Dean has been posting about assessment. For me, and I think for many educators, and I can't imagine that there are any students who find assessment to be the most exciting part of learning. And I'm excited by some of the things that you've been writing about and doing, Dean. I just made a couple of notes. You mentioned student-involved assessment, personalized assessment, formative assessment, and I double underlined assessment as learning, because it just doesn't seem like part of learning. It seems like the scorecard. So tell us about what you've been thinking and doing in regard to assessment.
Well, this journey sort of began for me around 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when our school district, I'm on leave right now from a K-12 school district, really sort of delved into this notion of rethinking assessment. And so I became pretty involved with changing that mindset. So as you mentioned before about changing the mindset from assessment to something different. And so I mean, there's always these terms that we wrestle with, evaluation and assessment, often are interchanged. And we really worked as a school district to try to separate those two and you know, simplistically talking about formative versus summative. But I think it's a little bit more involved in that. So that's where it began for me to start thinking about that. And thinking about, and then there's been other folks like Stephen Happel and others who have talked about assessment as learning, which is really an interesting notion. So I followed the work of people like Rick Stiggins in the US, and then watched very closely with countries like Scotland, who I think are really doing some interesting work around rethinking that assessment. So those are a lot of my influences. What happened, though, I think for me, what's interesting is I began to see a lot of these conversations about empowering students to use information to better their learning, but I wasn't seeing a lot of tie-ins to technology, and I thought there was really a missing link, as I've titled a few of my presentations. Was how does technology play a role in this assessment? And so as I began to teach at the University of Regina starting in 2007, I really wanted to take what I had learned previous to that and really figure out what this actually looks like in the classroom. And so that began for me a journey of using technology and taking these big ideas around a shifted mindset around assessment and seeing how they played out. And you know, in the past 5 or 6 years that I've been doing this, you know, I've certainly, you know, done some things that I probably should do differently, and I've been tweaking it. So I'm definitely feel like I'm still in the emergent stage, I guess, of trying to understand it, but you know, have definitely made some specific steps forward.
You know, a lot of learning really isn't centered on learning. It's centered on the subject matter, and students and teachers alike don't really spend a lot of time talking about how it is that they're learning. One of the things that impressed me was an exercise I think you borrowed from someone else. I mean, I think one of the great things about personal learning networks is that we're all borrowing great ideas from each other. But one of the ideas that struck me that I'm going to use was asking your students to go out and learn something and then make a presentation about what they've learned and reflect on how they learned it. Is this something that you think that we can somehow adapt to multiple subjects?
You know, it was funny. I had this conversation with my wife, who's a grade 2 teacher here in Saskatchewan, about the challenges that she faces, and I think it's universal. And where I've really begun to emphasize this change is in a statement that I don't even remember where I got it from, but I'm using it all the time, that says, you may not be able to measure learning, but you can document it. And I think that's an important notion, that our, in our sort of metrics obsessed society of measuring everything, We maybe need to get away from that, but we can document it. So the documentation comes in asking that question, what did you learn? And how you document it might not look the same as how I document it, and what you find valuable might not be the same as what I find valuable. And so this doesn't work very well when the outcomes are really narrow and targeted. But in a lot of learning, in a lot of learning that specifically when we talk about things like inquiry-based learning, which is a big buzzword in schools right now, that has to include the personal nature of learning that says, I'm inquiring about this, or I want to learn about this. So going back to what you suggested, what I did last year with the learning project was really that idea of assessment as learning, so that you're documenting what you're doing along the way and reflecting upon that, and then being able to say, I need to change course here and I need to do things differently. And that's just not something that schools have been particularly good at, because the curriculum was pretty structured and linear, and you start here and you end it here, and you had a short period of time to get there, and there just wasn't a lot of time or emphasis on thinking about the learning. And so I'm really trying to push this notion of reflection. And I know, Howard, this is the stuff I've been borrowing from you lately, is your whole attention literacy, and the key word that you use all the time is mindfulness. And I think that also should be applied to the way in which we learn, and being mindful of what things work for us and what things don't. And that documentation becomes extremely valuable data for me as an instructor, to find out, I didn't realize that was the way you learned best, or the thing that you found most interesting. And so what I do at the end of my course, I always do, is my final exam sort of consists of that presentation of what did you learn? I mean, it's a pretty straightforward question. And I tell my students that presentation is as much for me as it is for them, because I find out that there were certain parts of the course that were more engaging to them, or certain parts they didn't understand, or whatever. And so I take those presentations really seriously as the core evaluation in many respects of the course, and finding out what things I probably need to do better on, and what things I really did well. But again, I think all the things we can learn is this notion of we need to do a better job of thinking about learning and documenting it, as opposed to being obsessed with trying to measure it.
Well, so back to the role of technology, the role of digital media. I take it that some of your students document it by making a video, and some of them use blogs. How do you fit assessment into this use of blogging and video and other technologies?
Well, the big advantage that it affords is to take the onus of all of this assessment and all of this feedback out of the hands of the professor exclusively. Because in previous iterations of school, assignments would be handed into the teacher, and now the teacher is the only person who provides feedback. Occasionally a student might give a presentation in class, and maybe we'd ask for student feedback. But when we think about this notion of a community of learners, it really evidences itself as they begin to post and share things online. So whether it's video or whatever the media or format they use, the real interesting part to me is the fact that they can see each other's work closely, and not only see the work, but also the documentation of the work. And so what begins to happen is that they ask questions of each other, and my role is now I don't have to be the one that's providing feedback every single time to all their teachers. And it's what's the interesting dynamic that I'm finding is that so many of my students still expect me as the teacher to be the person that's always giving them feedback, and they somehow feel like my feedback is more important or valuable. And I'm trying to suggest to them that it may not be, that there may be other students in your class who actually are giving you better feedback and are better resources for learning than I am. I certainly don't have a problem with that, but I think some of the students are really struggling with that role, because you're the one that's supposed to be telling me I'm good or I'm not good. And I'm saying, well, first of all, I want you to be able to decide whether you're good or not, or whether you've done is quality work. But as important as that is use your colleagues and use the community to support that as well.
You know, I find that you can kind of turn that training on its head in the sense that, of course, students are trained to be students, and they're trained to they know their role in the hierarchy, and they know that the teacher is supposed to know. If the teacher says, okay, your job is to co-learn and to build a learning community, then they kind of take that authority to free themselves. It takes a little while, I think, but by using that authority to say, I'm still here, I'm still going to give you your grade, and I know the subject, and I'm going to help, but you are responsible for this, and not only are you responsible for this, it's going to be a lot richer if we all teach each other, and I'm here to learn as well. And it's something that it kind of shakes them up. It takes them a little while to get into it, but then I find they get really enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges we mentioned, I think, before you started recording, that you're teaching a shortened semester or a shortened course. I think that's the challenge of those short, and I've done that too, where I've taught the 6-week courses, because what you've suggested is something that I need to get better at explaining that and setting that up. I mean, I do that, but it seems like it takes some students longer to sort of click in and say, yeah, I get it. And so often in a 6-week course, they get it in week 5, you know, and that's too bad, because they realize, oh man, I could have really benefited had I embraced this sooner or understood it. And I get it. That's something like it's a lot of them to think through that. So that's why I've always sort of preferred, if I can actually teach in a full, 13-week semester. I'm finding that most of my students, there's time for them to sort of make that transition and explore that, and in the shortened time, it's hard to do that, and that's again where I've struggled. But to the next level, and I don't know if we were going to talk about this at all, but when it comes to the actual evaluation part, in my last session that I taught, I completely passed that evaluation over to my students, where I said to them, you are going to decide your grade, and the only requirement that I have is that you have to justify and document why you did that. Now, we talked about along the way, we co-created not so much rubrics, but criteria for success. What would good work look like? And we modified that along the way as they learned more about, I'm not sure this is how I want mine to look. But again, what I continue to emphasize is you need to document, and you need to think about the quality of work that you're producing. And sometimes that is in comparison to other people's work. Sometimes that's in comparison, we talk about criterion-based and standards-based referencing, but and I think sometimes there's room for both of those to exist. But that was another real big shift, to empower them to say it. And the feedback that I got was, from many of them, was, this freed me up to learn, because I wasn't worried about a grade anymore. I just was focusing on the learning. And yet there were others who struggled with that and thought that was a burden for them. They thought that I should be the one to do that. So it was an interesting experiment, which I'll continue with in the future.
I'm still building up my courage to get to that point, and I think our time is drawing to a close here. But I think that what you're talking about in terms of documenting, it really dovetails with the idea of the e-portfolio, of students
Absolutely.
taking what they've done online and making a case out of it for themselves and for the teacher of what they've learned.
I mean, and what I'm most fascinated with, and I've talked about this a lot. I mean, I'm the type of person who, when I'm watching a movie, I'm as much interested in going to the end of it and seeing the behind-the-scenes stuff as I am the movie. Like, how did they do that, right? And I'm wanting to know the backstory. And I think about that as the metaphor for learning. Is you might produce a video or write a paper or do whatever product you do, but I'm as much interested in the backstory of how did you do that, or where did that idea, how did that idea emerge? And that's the messiness kind of it, and it sort of exposes, I guess, in many regards, the mystery behind things. And it's why I've encouraged teachers to blog, because I think as teachers, you begin to use that space to sort of uncover the mystery of what I do in my classroom and show me that, it's pretty messy. Like I didn't just get to this in one day. There's a lot that went into that, and I find that really fascinating. I don't know if other people feel the same, but I love that part of the learning is the backstory.
I do too, and I think that you're giving a lot of us the courage to kind of push ourselves with assessment. It's kind of the last frontier for many of us. So thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Howard. It was good talking to you.